"God, just take me now," said the abandoned little girl, but a millionaire saw her and changed her life. Watch until the end. Leave a comment letting me know what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10. I really want to know if you liked my story, and please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The blizzard that covered Aspen, Colorado, on that Saturday in January 2024 wasn't in any weather forecast. 20 years had passed since white flakes had danced through the streets of the mountain town, and now they were falling with an intensity that transformed the mountainous landscape into a fairy tale scene. But for David Sinclair, 52, that natural beauty was just another obstacle in his desperate search. "Dad, Arthur, shh," he yelled for the third time, his voice echoing through the empty central square. The icy wind cut his face, and the wool coat he wore was quickly covered in snow. His eyes scanned every bench, every tree, every corner where his 78-year-old father might have taken refuge. Alzheimer's had gradually stolen the brilliant mind of Arthur Sinclair, but never before had he disappeared during one of his spells of confusion. David stopped abruptly when he spotted a small figure kneeling near the central gazebo. A girl of only 4, with brown hair disheveled by the wind, wore only a faded pink blouse and a cotton skirt that offered little protection against the intense cold. Her small hands tightly gripped a silver cross necklace, and her lips moved in a silent prayer as tears froze on her rosy cheeks. "My gosh, little one, what are you doing out here alone in this cold?" David asked, crouching beside her. His heart, already tight with worry for his father, contracted even more at the sight of the girl's condition. Jasmine lifted her large, frightened eyes, hesitating before answering in a trembling voice. "Auntie Valerie said to wait here. She was going to get food and come back, but that was yesterday." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Yesterday? You spent the whole night out here?" The girl nodded, clutching the necklace to her chest. "I prayed for my grandma to protect me. She said this cross would always keep me safe." Something in the child's innocence struck a sensitive chord in David's heart. Throughout his adult life, he had built solid emotional walls, a result of the abandonment he suffered when his mother left without explanation when he was just 7. Showing affection had always been a constant struggle, even in his marriage to Christine. But looking at Jasmine awakened a protective instinct he thought he had long since buried. "Do you know where this Auntie Valerie lives?" he asked, taking off his own coat and wrapping it around the girl's thin shoulders. "She said we don't have a house, that we belong to the world." Jasmine hesitated, biting her lower lip. "But I remember a house that smelled like wood and a lady who made chocolate fudge right out of the pot. Do you think she still lives there?" David frowned. That description evoked distant memories of his own childhood, of his maternal grandmother's house where he spent his summers, but he pushed those thoughts away, focusing on the urgency of the situation. He couldn't leave a helpless child in the snow while searching for his father. "Listen, little one, I'm going to take you somewhere warm, okay? And then we'll figure out where your aunt is." He held out his hand, and Jasmine took it with a surprising confidence for a child who had just met him. As they walked through the snow-covered streets toward his house, David continued to call out for his father, hoping that somehow Arthur would hear his voice and appear. Jasmine walked silently beside him, occasionally pointing at the falling flakes and whispering something about little stars from the sky. "What's your name?" David asked, realizing he still didn't know the girl's name. "Jasmine. And you?" "David. David Sinclair." Jasmine's eyes lit up slightly. "Sinclair? That name is pretty. It sounds like music." They arrived at David's house, a 2-story construction with the typical alpine architecture that dominated Aspen. The dark wood contrasted with the white walls, and the wide porch offered a privileged view of the surrounding mountains. Normally, David would feel pride showing off his property, the result of years of hard work at his furniture factory. Today he just wanted a safe place for the girl while he continued his search. "Christine!" he called as he opened the door. "Christine, I need your help!" Christine Sinclair emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. At 45, she maintained the elegant posture that had characterized her since her nursing school days. But her eyes revealed a deep sadness that had settled in after years of failed attempts to have children. The medical accident that resulted in her infertility had left scars that transcended the physical. "David, did you find Arthur?" she asked, before noticing the child beside her husband. Her expression changed instantly, a mixture of surprise and something close to panic. "Who is this girl? I found her alone in the square, freezing. Dad hasn't turned up yet, but I couldn't leave her there." David helped Jasmine take off the wet coat. "She says some Auntie Valerie abandoned her there yesterday." Christine instinctively took a step back. For the last 5 years, she had built up strict emotional defenses to protect herself from the constant pain of not being able to be a mother. Seeing a child in her home, especially one who clearly needed maternal care, triggered all her internal alarms. "David, we can't just bring a strange child home. There are procedures, proper authorities." "She was alone in the snow, Christine." David's voice carried a determination she rarely heard. "I wasn't going to let her freeze to death while we look for the right authorities." Jasmine watched the tense exchange between the couple, her big eyes capturing every nuance of the argument. When she sensed she might not be welcome, she clutched her necklace again and whispered, "I can go back to the square if you want. I don't want to be a bother." Those words broke Christine's heart, temporarily shattering her defenses. As a nurse, she had cared for many children over the years and recognized the signs of abandonment and neglect. She sighed deeply, fighting against her own fears. "No, sweetie, you're not going back into the cold. We'll figure this out." She crouched down to Jasmine's level, forcing a smile. "How about some hot chocolate while we think about what to do?" While Christine prepared the hot drink, David couldn't stand still. The combination of worry for his missing father and the sudden responsibility for an unknown child created an almost unbearable tension. He paced the living room, occasionally stopping at the window to see if Arthur would appear. "David," Christine said quietly, "you need to keep looking for your father. I'll stay with her for now." Jasmine approached the window where David stood and placed her small hand on the fogged glass. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked. "My father. He got lost in the snow." To their surprise, Jasmine began to draw on the fogged glass with her finger. Simple but precise lines formed what looked like a rudimentary map. "There's an old house near those big trees," she said, pointing in a specific direction. "It smells like cut wood. Maybe he's there hiding from the cold." David was stunned. Jasmine's drawing showed with impressive accuracy the location of the old carpentry shop where Arthur had worked decades ago, a place that had been abandoned for years and that a 4-year-old child should never know. The abandoned workshop of the old carpentry was only a 15-minute walk from David's house, but the snow had turned the path into a treacherous journey. He followed Jasmine's improvised drawing with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope, while the girl insisted on accompanying him despite Christine's protests. "How do you know this place?" David asked for the 3rd time, watching Jasmine walk with a strange confidence through the snow-covered trails. "I dream about it sometimes," she answered simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "In the dream, there's a man with white hair who makes beautiful things with wood. He sings a song about finches." David's heart skipped a beat. Arthur always hummed an old song about finches while he worked, a habit he had kept even after retiring from carpentry 40 years ago. How could a child who should have never met his father know that? When they reached the workshop, the wooden door was ajar, swinging gently in the wind. David pushed it open completely and called out, "Dad! Arthur, are you in there?" A faint groan echoed from the back of the dark workshop. David ran towards the sound, finding Arthur huddled behind a workbench, covered in decades of dust. The old man was conscious, but clearly disoriented, and with a superficial wound on his forehead. "Son?" Arthur muttered, blinking in confusion. "What are you doing at the workshop? It's still too early for work." "Dad, it's 6 in the evening. You got lost in the snow, remember?" David knelt beside his father, carefully checking the extent of his injuries. The experience of caring for Arthur in recent years had taught him how to handle these episodes of temporal confusion. It was then that Jasmine approached timidly, her footsteps echoing in the empty workshop. When Arthur saw her, his expression changed drastically, his confused eyes focused with surprising clarity, and he extended a trembling hand toward the girl. "Dolores?" he whispered, using the name of his late wife. "Did you come for me?" "No, Grandpa Artie," Jasmine said softly, taking the old man's hand. "It's me, Jasmine." David froze. Grandpa Artie was an intimate nickname that only Dolores had used, a term of endearment that had died with her 10 years ago. No one else in the family knew or used it. How could this girl know? "How did you—" David began, but was interrupted by Arthur, who had started humming the same song about finches, while Jasmine held his hand and smiled. The walk back home was silent and tense. Arthur walked leaning on David, occasionally looking at Jasmine with an expression of recognition that made no sense. Christine was waiting for them on the porch, relief evident on her face when she saw Arthur was safe. "Thank God you're both okay," she said, helping to bring Arthur inside. "I'll take care of that cut on your forehead, Mr. Sinclair." While Christine attended to her father-in-law, David watched Jasmine silently explore the living room. The girl seemed particularly drawn to an old shelf where David kept some wooden pieces Arthur had carved over the years. She ran her small fingers over a carved bird with surprising delicacy. "This little bird looks like the ones I draw," she commented, holding up the piece to examine it better. "My father made that many years ago," David explained, approaching her. "He was always very talented with his hands, just like the Grandpa Artie from my dreams," Jasmine murmured, an observation that sent an inexplicable shiver down David's spine. Later that night, after Arthur had been medicated and put to rest, and Jasmine had fallen asleep on the living room sofa wrapped in blankets, David and Christine finally had a chance to talk in private. "That girl knows things she shouldn't know," David said, pouring coffee for both of them in the kitchen. "She knew the exact location of the workshop. She called my father Grandpa Artie, and he reacted to her as if he knew her." Christine sighed, stirring her coffee with mechanical movements. "David, you're looking for connections where there are none. It's natural for an abandoned child to awaken our compassion, but we can't create fantasies." "They're not fantasies," he interrupted. "You saw how my father reacted to her. He hasn't had a moment of such clear lucidity in months." "And that scares you?" Christine asked, watching her husband carefully. She knew David's behavioral patterns well when he felt emotionally threatened. David hesitated. The truth was, yes, he was scared. Jasmine's presence awakened feelings he had learned to suppress, memories of his own fragmented childhood, and the constant fear of getting attached to something that could be taken from him again. "Tomorrow, I'm going to look for information about this Valerie person," he said, avoiding a direct answer. "And we're going to find out where Jasmine really came from." The next morning, Sunday, David woke up early and found Jasmine already awake, drawing on a piece of paper she had found. But these weren't the simple birds she had drawn on the fogged glass. This time, she was drawing with impressive precision the facade of a house that David recognized immediately. It was the house where his maternal grandmother had lived, demolished more than 15 years ago. "Jasmine, where did you see this house?" he asked, sitting beside the girl. In the house that smells like wood that I remember, she replied, continuing to add details to the drawing. The white-haired lady showed me pictures of it when she was young. David felt a lump form in his throat. His maternal grandmother had been a loving woman who compensated for his mother's emotional absence, and he had spent many happy summers in that house. But how could Jasmine know such specific details? Just then, Christine entered the room carrying a breakfast tray. She had spent a sleepless night battling her own emotional demons. Seeing Jasmine sleeping peacefully on her sofa had awakened a maternal ache she thought she had controlled. "Good morning, sweetie," she said to Jasmine, forcing a smile. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Christine. I dreamed about my mommy again." "Your mommy?" Christine asked, sitting beside them. "Do you remember her?" Jasmine nodded sadly. "She used to sing to me before I went to sleep. She said one day we'd have a real house with a garden and everything." "And what happened to her?" David asked gently. "I don't know. One day she just didn't come back. Auntie Valerie said she went away, but I think she just got lost." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, just like Grandpa Artie yesterday. Christine instinctively reached out and pulled the girl into a hug, her resolve to maintain emotional distance completely crumbling. "Don't cry, my little one. Sometimes people get lost, but that doesn't mean they don't love us." It was in this tender moment that someone knocked vigorously on the door. David went to answer and was faced with a thin woman of about 40 in shabby clothes, who stared at him with a mixture of desperation and determination. "I've come for my niece," the woman said without preamble. "I heard you have Jasmine." David crossed his arms, instinctively blocking the entrance. "And you are?" "Valerie Nash. I'm the girl's aunt and her legal guardian." The woman tried to look over David's shoulder. "Where is she? The same Valerie who abandoned a 4-year-old child alone in the snow?" David's voice was heavy with controlled outrage. "I didn't abandon anyone. I had an emergency and had to leave. I came back to get her, but you had already taken her." Valerie shifted nervously, avoiding direct eye contact. "Now I want her back." Behind David, Jasmine had hidden behind Christine upon hearing Valerie's voice. Her small body trembled, not from cold, but from a fear that spoke louder than any explanation. "Do you have documents to prove your guardianship?" David asked. Valerie hesitated for a moment before answering. They're being processed. Bureaucratic issues, you know how it is." It was an obvious lie, and everyone present knew it. But the situation was becoming more complicated by the minute, and David realized they needed real answers about Jasmine's origin before this woman could take her away again. "I will not allow you to take this child until you prove you have a legal right to her," David declared firmly, blocking the entrance to the house. Valerie tried to push him, but he remained motionless. "You have no right to keep her," Valerie shouted, her voice echoing down the quiet street. "Jasmine is my responsibility." "Auntie Valerie, please don't shout," Jasmine whispered from inside the house, her small voice laden with fear. "I don't want to leave right now." Christine held the girl's hand, her heart breaking as she saw the genuine terror in Jasmine's eyes. Her experience as a nurse had taught her to recognize signs of childhood trauma, and everything in the child's body language indicated that Valerie was not a figure of safety. "Listen carefully," David said, lowering his voice but keeping his tone firm. "If you really care about Jasmine, you'll want what's best for her. And right now she needs stability, not more abandonment." Valerie recoiled slightly, her hands shaking in a way that didn't seem related only to the cold. "You don't understand. There are people, complicated situations. It's not safe for her to stay here." "What kind of situations?" pressed Christine, approaching the door with Jasmine still clinging to her skirt. "Family problems, people who shouldn't find her." Valerie glanced nervously over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone following her. "It's better this way, believe me." At that moment, Mrs. Gable, the 78-year-old neighbor who lived next door, appeared on her porch. The old woman had been a close friend of the Sinclair family for decades and knew all the old residents of Aspen. "David, dear, is everything all right over there?" she asked, adjusting her glasses to get a better look at the situation. "Mrs. Gable, do you know this woman?" David asked, indicating Valerie. The neighbor came down the steps of her house and approached, examining Valerie carefully. "She doesn't look familiar, no, but—" She paused, looking at Jasmine. "This little girl reminds me of someone." Reminds you of who?" Christine asked, intrigued. "There was a young woman who lived here in town a few years ago, very private, worked as a maid for a few families. She had a tiny little daughter I'd sometimes see playing in the yard of the house where they lived." Mrs. Gable crouched down to Jasmine's level. "What's your mommy's name, dear?" "Mommy Hope," Jasmine answered without hesitation. "She sang a song about finches every night." Mrs. Gable's eyes widened. "Hope! The young woman's name was Hope. I knew I'd seen that little face before." Valerie turned even paler and took a step back. "You're getting things confused. I'll come back later with the documents." "No," David said firmly. "If you leave now, I'll consider it abandonment of the child again. How about we clear all this up right now?" "Hope Sinclair was her full name," Mrs. Gable continued, ignoring Valerie's discomfort. "A hard-working girl, very polite. But she disappeared all of a sudden about a year ago, took the girl, and no one ever heard from her again." "Why did she leave?" Christine asked. "Well, there was a strange situation. A woman showed up one day claiming to be a social worker, saying she was going to help Hope with the child's documentation. After that visit, Hope got very nervous, and a week later, she was gone." Valerie began to back away slowly, but David followed her. "This social worker, what did she look like?" Mrs. Gable looked directly at Valerie. "Thin, dark hair, about this lady's age here. In fact," she frowned, studying Valerie's face, "you two look very much alike." "Coincidence," Valerie muttered, but she was visibly agitated. It was then that Arthur, who had remained silent, holding on to Jasmine, said something that completely changed the course of the conversation. "Hope was my daughter." Everyone turned to him, surprised by the sudden clarity of his words. Arthur blinked a few times, as if trying to organize fragmented memories. "Hope, my little girl. She fought with us when she was 17 and left home. Never came back." He looked at Jasmine with growing tenderness. "This is the granddaughter I never met." David felt the world spin around him. Hope Sinclair. That name had been buried in his memory for a long time. His younger sister, who had left home after a violent argument with their father about dating and freedom. He was only 20 at the time and was so focused on taking over the family business that he hadn't insisted she come back. For years, he had carried the guilt of not going after her. "Does that mean—" Christine began, looking from David to Jasmine. "Jasmine is my niece," David concluded, kneeling to the girl's level. "My sister Hope's daughter." Jasmine watched him with her big, curious eyes. "You're my uncle." "It seems so, little one." Valerie used the emotional confusion of the moment to move further away, but Christine intercepted her. "Don't even think about running away now. You have a lot to explain." "I didn't do anything wrong," Valerie protested weakly. "Where is Hope?" David asked, standing up with an authority that made Valerie flinch again. "What did you do to my sister?" "I didn't do anything. She asked me to take care of the girl temporarily." "Lies," Mrs. Gable said firmly. "I knew Hope. She would never leave her daughter voluntarily. That little girl was her whole world." Jasmine began to cry silently, overwhelmed by the emotions of the adults around her. Christine immediately picked her up, whispering words of comfort. Let's go inside, David decided. And you, Valerie, are going to tell us exactly what happened to Hope, or I'm calling the authorities. Valerie knew she was cornered. She glanced one last time at the street, as if considering a run for it, but the presence of Mrs. Gable and other curious neighbors who were starting to gather made it impossible. "All right," she sighed, "but you're not going to like what you hear." Inside the house, while Arthur played quietly with Jasmine on the sofa, Valerie began to tell a version of the truth that would be even more disturbing than the lies she had told before. The discovery that Jasmine was David's niece had changed everything, but the answers they were about to get would lead the Sinclair family down a path of revelations that none of them were prepared to face. "Hope didn't disappear," Valerie said finally, avoiding eye contact with anyone present. "She was convinced to give Jasmine up voluntarily." "Convinced by whom?" David asked, his voice dangerously low. "By people who promised to give the girl a better life, people with money." Valerie paused, looking directly at David. "People like you." "What do you mean, people like us?" Christine asked, her voice trembling with indignation. Valerie squirmed in her chair, clearly uncomfortable with where the conversation was heading. Hope was desperate. She had no money, lived in a tiny rented room, worked as a maid to support the girl, when I showed up saying I knew a rich family who wanted to adopt a child. "You lied to my sister," David interrupted, his fists clenched. "You deceived a vulnerable mother." "Oh, I didn't lie about everything," Valerie defended herself. "The family really exists. They had money, a nice house. They could give Jasmine everything Hope couldn't." "Then why was Jasmine alone in the square?" Christine pressed, though she already suspected the answer. Valerie lowered her head. "The family changed their minds. They said they wanted a baby, not a 4-year-old who could already talk and ask for her mother all the time." The silence that followed was heavy and painful. On the sofa, Jasmine played with Arthur, oblivious to the conversation that was defining her destiny. The old man seemed more lucid in the girl's presence, telling stories about birds that she listened to with genuine fascination. "Where is Hope now?" David asked, forcing himself to remain calm. "In Chicago, working as a maid in a family's house." Valerie hesitated before continuing. She thinks Jasmine was legally adopted by a loving family. She doesn't know the adoption was called off." Christine stood up abruptly, walking to the window to hide the tears that were beginning to form. Hope's story echoed her own fears about motherhood, abandonment, and the pain of losing a child. "You destroyed 2 lives," she said without turning around, "a mother's and a daughter's." "I was trying to help," Valerie protested, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. "Hope was suffering. She had no means." "Hope is my sister," David said slowly, as if processing the reality. "My sister, who left home years ago and whom I never looked for, and now I find out her daughter." He looked at Jasmine, who had quietly approached him. "Uncle David," the girl said, pulling on his pants. "Are you sad?" David knelt and pulled Jasmine into a tight hug. For the first time in decades, he allowed the tears to fall freely. "I'm not sad anymore, little one. I'm happy I found you." "Where's my mommy Hope?" Jasmine asked innocently. It was Valerie who answered in a broken voice. "Your mommy is working far away. She thinks you're safe with a good family." "But I want to see her," Jasmine said simply. Christine turned from the window, making a decision that would surprise everyone. "Then we'll bring her back." "Christine," David began, concerned. "No, she interrupted firmly. "Jasmine deserves to have her mother. Hope deserves to know her daughter is safe, and we—" She paused, looking at her husband. "We are going to help reunite this family." In the weeks that followed, the search for Hope became an obsession for the Sinclair family. David used all his business contacts to track down his sister in Chicago, while Christine cared for Jasmine with a dedication that surprised herself. The girl had awakened in her a maternal instinct she thought she had lost forever. Arthur, for his part, experienced a remarkable transformation. Jasmine's presence seemed to anchor his fragmented memories, providing increasingly long moments of lucidity. He went back to carving small wooden birds, this time specifically for his newfound granddaughter. Valerie, faced with the magnitude of what she had done, decided to cooperate fully. She provided all the details she remembered about where she had left Hope, including the name of the family she worked for. The phone call that would change everything happened on a rainy Tuesday in August. David had finally gotten the contact number for the house where Hope worked, and with trembling hands, he dialed the number. "Hello, I'd like to speak with Hope Sinclair," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who's calling?" asked a female voice on the other end. "I'm David, her brother." There was a long pause before a familiar voice, but aged by suffering, answered, "David, is that really you?" "Hope." David's voice broke. "Little sister, I found your daughter." What followed was a conversation laden with tears, explanations, and mutual forgiveness. Hope revealed she had spent the last few months in a deep depression, working mechanically just to survive, while consumed with guilt for having abandoned Jasmine. "Is she okay?" Hope asked repeatedly. "Please, tell me she's okay." "She's more than okay. She's home," David replied, watching Jasmine play in the yard with Christine. "Our home, your home." Hope's trip back to Aspen was carefully planned. Christine, despite her own emotional pain at knowing she would lose Jasmine, focused on preparing the girl for the reunion with her mother. "Your mommy is coming to get you," she explained gently as she combed Jasmine's hair. "And are you coming with us?" the girl asked innocently. Christine had to turn away to hide her tears. "No, sweetie, you're going to live with your mommy." "But I like living here too," Jasmine said, confused. "Can't I stay with everyone I love?" That simple question from a 4-year-old planted a seed that would change all their futures. When Hope finally arrived in Aspen, she was thin and aged by suffering, but her eyes shone with a light that had been absent for months when she saw Jasmine running towards her. "Mommy Hope!" the girl cried, jumping into her mother's arms. The reunion was both thrilling and painful. Hope cried as she held her daughter, murmuring apologies that Jasmine didn't understand, but accepted with the simplicity of childish love. In the days that followed, a complex dynamic developed in the Sinclair house. Hope, grateful for how David and Christine had cared for Jasmine, but also ashamed of her own precarious financial situation. David, trying to rebuild the relationship with his long-lost sister. Christine, struggling with the pain of having to say goodbye to the child she had learned to love as a daughter. And Jasmine, at the center of it all, not understanding why the adults were so sad when she was finally surrounded by all the people she loved. It was Arthur, in one of his most lucid moments, who suggested the solution that seemed obvious to everyone except the adults involved. "Why doesn't Hope stay here?" he asked simply during dinner. "This house is big, Jasmine is happy, you're all together." The initial suggestion was met with hesitation and protests about practicality and convenience. But as the days passed, the idea began to make more and more sense. Hope could work at David's furniture factory, using the administrative skills she had developed over the years. Christine would have the chance to be a second mother to Jasmine, filling the void that infertility had left in her heart. And Jasmine would grow up surrounded by an extended family that loved her unconditionally. The final decision was made one September afternoon as they were all gathered in the yard watching Jasmine play with the wooden birds Arthur had carved for her. "I'd like to try," Hope said finally, "if you really want us here." "We do," David replied without hesitation. More than anything. Christine knelt beside Jasmine, who was carefully arranging her wooden birds in a row. What do you think, little one? Would you like to live here with your mommy and with me and Uncle David? Jasmine looked at each of the adults, her big eyes shining with a wisdom that seemed beyond her 4 years. Can I call you Mommy Chris too? Christine felt her heart break and mend itself all at once. If your Mommy Hope agrees, I would love that. And so, in a house in Aspen where the snow had fallen unexpectedly, an unconventional but deeply loving family began to form. Valerie, confronted with the consequences of her actions, decided to leave town, but not before offering a sincere apology to everyone involved. Months later, as another blizzard covered the mountain town, Jasmine watched the flakes fall from the porch of the house, holding Hope's hand on one side and Christine's on the other, while David and Arthur worked together on a new wooden sculpture. The girl who had been found alone in the snow was now surrounded by more love than one child could ever need, in a family that had been brought together by the mysterious ways of fate and the transformative power of unconditional love. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.